But we wanted education that really supports the practical application of what our students are learning directly to the students' lives as well as for their professional work. And of high importance is to be able to offer affordable educational programs. So to support your health as well as your thirst for knowledge, Hawthorn offers 2 webinar presentations each month in holistic health and nutrition at no cost because we believe in your commitment to ongoing learning. Well, greetings to everyone that's here. Welcome to Hawthorn University. You've got Paula Bartholomew, and as usual, I'm delighted that you've joined me. We're here a little bit early before the presentation so that I can share a few announcements and some holistic health news with you. And then at the top of the hour, we'll begin the presentation with Glen Depke, and the focus today is on SIBO, and we'll talk about what's ailing our guts and discover if it's SIBO is the culprit. Just a reminder that everybody in the audience is muted, and you'll have full access to your webinar panel so that you can ask questions and pose your comments at any time. And by all means, put in questions that you want Glen to be able to answer. And you don't need to wait until the end. If there's something on your mind, go ahead and put it in. Make sure that you're in queue. And then at the top of the hour, after Glen's presentation, I'll pose your questions for Glen. And Alex will be posting information to the webinar chat panel throughout the presentation too, so you can keep your eyes on that. And if you didn't join us, our last webinar was on June 7th, and we had Dr. Nishanga Bliss with us, and she was presenting on Body, Mind, Spirit, Planet, the holistic health principles. You know, this was a really good presentation. It was so good we've added it to curriculum. So if you haven't checked it out, it was really well done. It just gave a great historical overview of holistic health and healing modalities coming up until now. I thought it was just put together really well. So if you missed it, we recorded it, and we're going to record this one too, so you can access them from the Hawthorn website, and you'll find them under archived webinars. Another event, if you haven't tuned into that, is the All About Alumni series. And this is where I get to showcase Hawthorn graduates, and they've got a 30-minute segment where they give a presentation, and then we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes for you to ask your questions directly. And these presentations air live at noon Pacific time on the first Wednesday of each month. And each graduate gets to share their success stories, and they also talk about the challenges that they've faced and what they've learned from them and how they've overcome them. And they just have a lot of encouragement to share and really advice on what they've learned along the way. So it's very inspiring, and I hope you'll join me. On June 1st was our last All About Alumni presentation with Jenny Yell. And she had a lot of inspiring things to say about her post-graduation experience, and she shared a lot about designing and managing a successful website. She sure has one. Au Naturel Nutrition is its name. And she talked a lot about what it takes to manage its operation and to attract and maintain a loyal online audience. All very important for us in business, right? So that recording's up on our website, and I'm really thrilled that you get to learn about all that Jenny's doing and what she had to teach about websites. She had a lot to contribute. So if you're needing to start a website or maintain one or just have questions, it's a good 30-minute segment to check out. And it was so good that I'm going to ask her to do a longer piece and have that be part of curriculum too. And then our next one, All About Alumni, it will be July 7th. That's the first Wednesday in July. And I hope you'll join us for that. It's a live webinar with graduate Autumn Smith. And she's going to talk about Paleo Valley. It's her wildly successful business. So she'll go into that, and which started when she first was starting at Hawthorn and built it while she was in school and is expanding since then. And then she'll talk about what else she's doing on a clinical level since graduation, with a particular focus on her thesis, which had to do with anxiety. Yeah, I mean, she graduated from Hawthorn's 60-credit master's program, so she's got a lot of tools and resources to bring to the work that she's doing. This is just a great lunchtime opportunity, so I hope that you'll prepare some food and tune in with us live, and that's Wednesday, July 7th for our next All About Alumni. And then finally here, we're going to have a survey that we ask you to complete after the webinar ends. And it's an opportunity for you to be able to give us your feedback on this presentation today, to let us know what you'd like to learn more about in upcoming webinars. And perhaps you'll have a suggestion of a Hawthorn graduate you'd like to hear more about. The survey is really a way for you to communicate with us and let us know your thoughts and your feelings. And I want to guarantee you that I pay attention to this. So, not wasting your time there at all. I think that's it for announcements. I just wanted to say hello to our presenter, Glen Depke. Like, sorry, Glen, I should have
Thank you, Paula.
started that right away. Oh, I'm a little rude here today, but I'll get over that.
Yeah, no, it's I was just sitting here enthralled with everything we're saying anyway, so I wasn't aware of that.
Well, glad to have you with us, Glen, and I'm aware that you're about to relocate your office's Depke Wellness, and you're in Newport Beach, so why don't you talk a little bit about just that move and what it means for you and for your clientele?
Oh, well, I think the biggest thing is just the excitement of it. A lot of people, when they think of a move, they think of all the challenges of moving and packing and all of the logistics of it. But it's a newness. It's a refreshing. It's just every level. It's exciting, and we're going from where we had a shared space where it was a larger office that was called Impact Health and Wellness, and then Depke Wellness. We ran our location within that, and this is going to be a solely focused Depke Wellness Center, and we're just so excited. It's just going to give us the opportunity to really expand, what we do and how we help our clients, and just really help us make a bigger difference in the world. So it's exciting on every level.
And it's quite the testament to the work that you're doing and the success that you have, and may that continue for you and for all the people that you help in the world. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, we're just coming up at the top of the hour, so I'm going to transition into previewing the presentation and introducing you, and then have you start the presentation, okay?
Okay.
All right. So for the rest of you that have just tuned in, I see more people calling in all the time. Thank you so much. I want to welcome you to Hawthorn University's webinar series. I'm Paula Bartholomew. I'll be the webinar moderator for the webinar. And we get to welcome back adjunct faculty member Glen Depke today for a presentation on what's ailing your gut. SIBO may be the culprit. And in this webinar, we're going to learn what puts us at risk for SIBO, and SIBO is also known as small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And it's been shown to have a negative effect on digestion and nutrient absorption, and it can lead to leaky gut and a number of other symptoms. So this presentation will delve into what SIBO is, its causes, the diet, the protocol, testing options, things like that. Glen's very well versed in this, and so I'm looking forward to it. And Glen Depke, let me tell you a little bit more about him. He's a traditional naturopath. He's got advanced training in several modalities, including holistic iridology and the Kalish method, and emotional freedom technique, metabolic typing, traditional Chinese assessments, and German drainage therapy. Glen's become known as a master in adrenal insufficiency, and gluten intolerance, as well as customized nutrition and functional healing. Glen's worked alongside some of the most prominent healers of our time, most notably Dr. Joseph McCullough and the staff at the Center for Natural Health. And there he held the position of chief nutritionist, the wellness director, and developed their system of nutritional typing. And in Glen's work, his intention is to empower individuals that he works with to reach their health and wellness goals by addressing their individual needs while attending to physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual blocks that might hinder them from this goal. Very lofty ideals and powerful way to approach working with clients. So Glen, I know you've got a great presentation plan, so I want to turn it over to you so you can get started.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for the introduction. It's always a pleasure to be here. And as Paul had mentioned, we're going to talk today about what's healing your gut and really that SIBO may be the culprit. And before I get into this, I always like to really start with a special thanks to Hawthorn University. It's just Paula and the entire staff at Hawthorn University, I believe, is a gift to our world from a natural health perspective. And I always, something that I share with any prospective students or current students or alumni that ever reach out to me is that there's never, there's never a shortage of people that are having health challenges. There's just a shortage of people who've studied under Hawthorn University and really understand, the ideals of natural health. So I can't really thank Paula and the entire staff and Hawthorn University enough for really giving us all this opportunity. But today, what we want to focus on is obviously, we're going to talk about SIBO in depth. We're going to define SIBO. We are also going to discuss the many underlying factors, but I'm going to put a larger focus on the primary underlying factors as to why SIBO develops. There's a lot of information out there on the internet today, and we're going to really sift through this and get into the bigger factors for anybody challenged with SIBO. We're also going to discuss the symptoms of SIBO and the other secondary health challenges that would develop typically when people have a challenge with SIBO a little bit more long term. One thing that's going to be really awesome for everybody here is I'm going to also uncover a very simple at-home test and assessment that you can use to understand if SIBO is an issue for you. And it's a combination of something that you would take orally and an assessment that we'll be able to engage you with to really first understand if you do have gastrointestinal challenges, to really just understand, is SIBO likely for you? And a lot of this you're going to understand as we go through today's presentation. We're also going to talk about different testing options. This is one of the confusing areas for most people is, how do I test? What's the best way to test? And I'm going to share the testing that I offer my clients at Depke Wellness, but we're going to go over other testing, even tests that I wouldn't typically use, just to help educate you on the different options that are available for you. We're also going to discuss today the importance of a SIBO diet. This is an area that we want to go in depth with, and I just want to start with just to recognize that if somebody has SIBO, the diet is the #1 thing to focus on, along with the supplemental support or whatever support that you're using to help to really balance the SIBO challenge. We're also going to talk a little bit more in depth about that. We want to discuss the protocols to aid in overcoming SIBO. I'm going to share what I actually utilize with the clients at Depke Wellness, and I'm also going to touch on other products that would potentially benefit, even though they're not used per se in my wellness center specifically. And a big question that a lot of people ask all the time, we're going to get into today, is basically, is natural treatment or antibiotics the best option when somebody has SIBO? And that is a very important question that we will get into toward the end of today's presentation. So we'll start with, again, what is SIBO? Paula had mentioned earlier, this is the acronym for small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. And really, SIBO is a condition which abnormally large numbers of bacteria, basically the types that are normally found in the large intestine or the colon, are present in the small intestine. This is one of the confusing areas for a lot of people, that they think that SIBO is an infection, something like let's compare it to like a blastocystis hominis or cryptosporidium or an abundant overgrowth of E. coli, and that's really not the case. I mean, SIBO is just basically a migration of a bacteria from one area of your gastrointestinal tract into another, and really overpopulating the small intestines with what would not really be what we would consider the appropriate bacteria for that area of your body. And another important aspect to discuss with SIBO right at the beginning is that when you have SIBO, and basically when this is not functioning properly, tied into the migrating motor complex, basically fails to effectively sweep the intestinal contents into the colon during periods of fasting. So this is one of the areas that most people don't understand with SIBO, is that it's basically affecting that time frame. So let's say you have dinner at 6:30 and you don't snack until the evening, and then through the night when you're sleeping and you're not eating until, let's say, 7 o'clock in the morning. During that time of fasting between dinner and your breakfast the next morning, that migrating motor complex should be sweeping the basically the contents of the small intestine into the colon. And when you have SIBO, this basically is not functioning properly, creating a whole host of challenges that we're going to go over in today's presentation. Now, when we look at SIBO, where it's confusing for many is that the symptoms overall don't always just scream out SIBO, because there's many different gastrointestinal challenges that can create these symptoms, and it starts with bloating after consuming certain nutrients. We're going to go deeper into this later because I want to be very specific about the nutrients that you would consume that would basically irritate the condition of SIBO and provide that bloating and other symptom challenges for your GI. The next here, as just mentioned, the abdominal bloating is a primary symptom of SIBO. It could also be belching. There could be an experience of heartburn or reflux or GERD, depending on what you want to refer to this as. You could be dealing with flatulence, a gassiness expressed. It's not unlikely for people with SIBO, when they eat foods that irritate this condition, to actually be really challenged with abdominal pain or cramping. I've seen this consistently with clients throughout the years, where they'll eat something that irritates this and they almost know it right away. Now, what's also interesting, we're going to go into this much deeper later in the presentation, is that SIBO can actually cause either constipation or diarrhea, depending on the increase of which gas that we're talking about. And we're going to get deeper into that later in today's presentation. Also, another symptom of SIBO is somebody who may be diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome or IBS. And basically those symptoms of IBS, and even IBS in itself, just to understand, is that when a diagnosis is put forth and it has the word syndrome after it, it just means that there's not a deep understanding in conventional medicine as to what this is. But I can say firsthand, from a perspective of working with thousands of clients through the years, is that when you find a gastrointestinal disorder, it's almost 100% likely that you're eventually going to come to the underlying core factor of this. I don't really think any of this has to be a syndrome. It's just the really more of the effect of really being the good, being the Sherlock Holmes, basically, and doing your investigation to find what the underlying challenges may be. And another symptom of SIBO would be a carbohydrate intolerance or sensitivity. Any of these or all of these could be symptoms that somebody would be actually challenged with when they're dealing with small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. Now, there's also other secondary symptoms tied into SIBO. This could actually increase food sensitivities and allergies. Now, I wanted to go a little bit deeper into this because there's some really great research that is really the newest research in food sensitivity. Just first understanding that food sensitivity is a relatively new focus in the field of natural health. And there's always new information coming up. It's one of these areas where if you just hold on to the information you learned over the last year, it means you probably fell behind. And the one piece of this that I think is so fascinating and interesting and really essential to understand is it's been found that at the core of all food sensitivity is an inability to break down protein properly. And that is one of the challenges and the symptoms when somebody has SIBO. And so that inability to break down the protein properly, to convert that into the necessary amino acids, to create the single amino acids rather than the amino acid chains, is essential in helping people overcome food sensitivity. So beyond the food sensitivity and allergies, a secondary symptom of those with SIBO could be headaches. It's very common that people with SIBO are dealing with anywhere from just a regular to moderate fatigue, or really even to the point of chronic fatigue, which we'll mention a little bit. There's also symptoms of joint pain are considerably and mostly due to the fact of the inflammatory response that the SIBO condition will actually leave within the body, recognizing that there are inflammatory receptors throughout the body. So when there is inflammation in the gut, there eventually will be a more of a whole body systemic chronic inflammatory state, and inflammation is typically going to lead to some level of aches and pains for most people dealing with this chronically. I also find that many people that develop SIBO, if this is not dealt with properly over time, this can actually lead into autoimmune activity. Now, this could be on different levels. Just the recognition that SIBO itself can lead to leaky gut. Leaky gut is when we're going to have a breakdown in that mucosal tissue lining of the small intestines, and basically the openings within that tissue that should just be letting your macro and micronutrients through, so your fats and proteins and carbohydrates and the vitamins and minerals and the enzymes and coenzymes through. Well, those openings become enlarged, which then allow larger whole pieces of protein to actually make it through the small intestine walls and get into the blood, which then actually will begin an autoimmune type of cascade. So it's very important to address when you're working with somebody with an autoimmune condition. You want to get to the underlying factors of this, because conventional medicine, really there's no answer conventionally for autoimmunity, because you can't take a pill to take care of autoimmunity. But as natural health practitioners, we can actually get to the core of what's triggering the autoimmune response and give that particular client the best opportunity to return to a balanced, happy, and healthy life. Another symptom of SIBO could be asthma. I mentioned earlier the level of chronic fatigue that could be dealt with, or for those suffering with fibromyalgia. A generalized inflammatory condition, as we talked about with the joint pain, and it's very common because of the gut-brain connection that people dealing with SIBO are also dealing with a lack of mental clarity or some level of brain fog. And just to touch on that briefly, when I talk about the gut-brain connection, recognizing that your gut and your brain are ultimately connected. These are not two separate systems. This is one system working in collective partnership together. And we know this because 90% of the brain output goes right down the vagus nerve, through the spinal column, to the nervous system tissue in the gut, and comes right back up. So when there's a gut problem, there's a brain problem, and when there's a brain problem, there's a gut problem. We cannot separate those. So those are some of the initial secondary symptoms of SIBO. But there's also additional signs of people dealing with SIBO. Malabsorption leading into nutrient deficiencies. I can't tell you how many times I've seen clients in my practice that they're actually, they have a high level of nutritional integrity. They know what to eat. They take care of themselves. They're focusing on, good quality organic foods, grass-fed meats, wild-caught seafood and fish. They're focusing on the best quality they can, but they can still be malnourished, and SIBO is one of the bigger causes here. Another issue is that those with SIBO, this can lead to an iron deficiency anemia. And here's a big challenge with that. If somebody is deficient in iron, that's really a deal breaker as far as your health is concerned. It's next to, well, I mean, I'll even go out on a limb. I'll say it's impossible to get complete balance back into your body if you're living with an iron deficiency. And one of the challenges that I've seen through the years, especially with clients who have seen, maybe they've been working with a different practitioner or a conventional medical doctor, and they might recognize the iron deficiency because they've done some testing, but then they're just basically providing an iron supplement, which would make sense, right? If you think about it, you're deficient in iron, take an iron supplement. But the problem, though, is if you have SIBO or some other underlying factor that's inhibiting the ability to absorb and assimilate the iron, taking the supplement really isn't going to do much help. So it's important when you recognize this with your clients, or if this is yourself personally, you want to get to the bottom of this, and SIBO is often one of those cases. Also, with additional signs, I mean, and even though I just marked B12 here, this could be any B vitamin deficiency. B12 and folate and even B6 tend to be some of the more recognized deficiencies that will occur with people with SIBO, but this could affect any B vitamin, and basically because of the inability to, again, as it says right in the top of the slide, the malabsorption leading to nutritional deficiencies. Now, those with the B12 deficiencies are often suffering with challenges with the liver and detoxification, and they're often very fatigued. Because the B12 plays a significant role in energy production in the body. So there's a lot that's going on there. This can also lead to unhealthy weight loss, as we can see with the picture to the right here. And you know what? One of the things I hear so often with people in general is when I say something about unhealthy weight loss, I'll have people who feel like they need to lose weight often say that, wow, I wish I had that problem. And I can tell you right now that with the number of clients that I've had in my practice through the years who are at these extreme unhealthy levels of weight where they've lost so much not only fat but also muscle and soft tissue, and really seemingly can't gain weight to save their lives, and really to some level that's a true statement. This is a significant issue, and I've found through the years in my practice, it's much more difficult dealing with somebody who's at an unhealthy low weight rather than being overweight. And lastly with this, the additional signs is tied into fatty or floating stool. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, how the SIBO can affect the breakdown of, and basically the breakdown and emulsification of fat. And one of the key factors that is also tying into this that most people don't recognize is that when you're not emulsifying and breaking down your fat properly, as this non-emulsified fat is traveling through your small intestines, it also acts as a blanket, almost covering up other nutrients and just adding to another level of malabsorption and nutrient deficiency. So that's one thing to notice. If you have your bowel movement and you look back in the toilet to recognize what came out of your body, if it's floating to the top, that's an issue that you can actually look at and address properly. Now, some of the primary underlying factors as to why SIBO develop, these are very important, because again, as far as I'm concerned in my practice at Depke Wellness, and I like to believe of every student and everybody who's actually gone through the Hawthorn programs, we're always looking to get to the bottom of everything. So it's not just about assessing and using a test and seeing if somebody has SIBO and putting them on a diet and giving them supplements. It still comes down to you want to look deeper, whether this is yourself personally and you're dealing with SIBO or your practitioner that's going to be helping people with SIBO. It's about uncovering the underlying factors that cause this in the first place. I just feel that we're really doing people a disservice if we don't always get to the core, and that's what we're going to talk about here. So these are some of the key questions if you're working with a client with SIBO, or if you're challenged with SIBO yourself, just paying attention to this. So number one, really the use of antacids on a regular basis would be one of the factors as to why somebody would develop SIBO. Also, when somebody has been conventionally diagnosed as having acid reflux or GERD or heartburn, whatever it's going to be called at that point, very often those individuals are actually prescribed a proton pump inhibitor, a PPI. And the use of the PPIs is another really primary factor for this, and it's basically the challenge of this is that it really minimizes the stomach acid and the lack of acidity to neutralize bacteria, and basically the overall pH and homeostasis of the small intestine are really all being affected when you don't have the proper acidic level in the small intestines. So that's why this is one of those challenges that again, most people are diagnosed with this and they're told, well, you have heartburn, so we need to give you a PPI because they feel that the challenge is that you have too much stomach acid. And what I can say from a clinical experience and working with clients through the years, and again, getting to the core, most people who have heartburn or GERD or reflux, whatever we're going to call it, most of those individuals are actually low in stomach acid. They're not high. And it's the inability to break down their specifically proteins, but also minerals and B vitamins properly, and that slower motility of the tube of the stomach that creates the failing in the valve that pushes the stomach acid back up the esophagus, creating that really uncomfortable feeling that some people would have. Yeah, but that's one of the other factors tied into SIBO, which would go right into what's just below this, decreased stomach acid production. That is a significant challenge for anybody as a suspect for SIBO. Next here is the ileocecal valve dysfunction. Right, now, most of the students are going to already understand this, but there may be some people that don't know what the ileocecal valve is, and this is basically a valve that is between the colon, or the large intestine, and the small intestine, and basically that valve keeps the contents of the colon in the colon. Yeah, but when that valve actually becomes a challenge, and there's something functionally wrong with this, then basically that valve can begin to fail, and the failure of that valve can actually allow the contents, which now we're mostly talking about these bacteria levels of the colon, to basically migrate into the small intestines, causing all of these challenges and really kind of wreaking the havoc of what SIBO can cause for people. Now, this also could be tied into the enteric nervous system and just basically how the nervous system is creating this gut dysfunction. Remember I mentioned earlier between the gut-brain connection, so the brain and the entire autonomic nervous system, we're talking about that being the regulatory factor for motility in the entire gastrointestinal system. This is one of the things that I'm constantly addressing with clients on a regular basis through the years, is because so many people are constipated and so many people have low motility, and most people are thinking of this as a colon issue or a gut issue. But for most people, that poor motility, for a high percentage of people, is actually tied into the brain, because the brain is a regulatory factor for motility. And so we don't want to we want to make sure we recognize that. Now, another area, and we're going to talk about some stats on this later, but heavy to moderate alcohol use can also be something that would be playing a significant role in the development of SIBO. And we're going to talk about some statistics specifically for heavy alcohol use later in the presentation. And then lastly here, you can recognize the word constipation that I have bolded. Now, I bolded this because this, to me, is the primary factor that I see on a regular basis leading to SIBO. Now, as you can tell by what we talked about today, a lot of what I talked about above this could be underlying factors for why somebody would be constipated in the first place. Yeah, but when we are constipated, and I'm going to back up from that for a second. I first want to define constipation for you, because in my opinion, constipation is one bowel movement daily or less. And with working with clients through the years, it was interesting years ago. I used to just, when I'd have a new client come into the office, I would just simply ask them a question, and I would ask, do you have proper bowel movements? And I would typically get a yes as an answer from most people. And it was maybe a few years into my practice that I started to think, well, maybe I should actually be a little bit more defined with that question, rather than just asking what are proper bowel movements, because that's really an open-ended question. It just depends on how one person will define an optimal bowel movement. I had a friend years ago who had a small child, and unfortunately for this child, she was only having a bowel movement about once every 5 to 7 days. And I could recall that friend of mine mentioning that, I brought her to the pediatrician, and they said that, well, that's okay, that's normal, because everybody's on a different schedule. And I was shuddering at that. I'm thinking, you've got to be kidding me. 5 to 7 days, and somebody's saying that that's okay. And so again, it's going to be a different opinion from everybody. Now, what I'm always asking now, the question I ask my clients when they come in, is I'll say, do you have 2 or more healthy bowel movements per day, or do you have 1 or less bowel movements per day? And I'll have so many of my clients who will have this really, proud, happy look on their face to tell me, I have 1 bowel movement a day like clockwork. And I'm still sharing with them, though, that that was still what I would consider to be some level of constipation. Yeah, because basically the colon is designed to be a transport unit. And when we're achieving one or less than one bowel movement per day, we are now using the colon as a storage unit, and the colon is not designed for that. One of the challenges that will occur is that will actually allow for the contents of the colon, which of course will be residue from our food, but let's not forget that a big part of what's in the colon is the toxicity that's been pulled out of the liver, that's traveled through the small intestine and into the colon to be released because of the toxic effect it would have on the body. And the colon walls are permeable. So the toxicity that's in the colon, if it's not moving out of the body, will move through those walls, get into the tissue and back into the blood. And basically we're recycling toxicity. And we all live on the same planet. We all live on planet Earth, and we could recognize that there is definitely a level of environmental toxicity that we deal with on a regular basis. So the last thing we want to do is to be recycling that toxicity, right? So to go a little bit deeper with the constipation directly into SIBO, though, is that when you are using your colon as a storage unit, as mentioned, so that's going to be one bowel movement per day or less, basically what you're doing is you're putting pressure on that ileocecal valve that I talked about earlier, and constant pressure on the ileocecal valve can eventually lead to a failure of the ileocecal valve, thus leading into the migration of the bacteria from the colon into the small intestine, leading to the SIBO condition. So the constipation is the one big area that I'm always looking at, and going back to always remembering that constipation is tied into motility, which is generally a deeper brain issue, and tied into the whole gut-brain connection. It's not just about basically your colon. Now, there's other underlying factors that are also important to recognize. First off on here, neurodegenerative type of diseases. Whether this is just a basic neurodegeneration or perhaps to an extreme of a diagnosis of a dementia or Alzheimer's. But when basically this is going to be tied directly into the infiltration of that intestinal migrating motor complex. Again, slowing down the motility of the GI overall. Excuse me. A brain injury could also be tying into this, because that could actually not only cause a level of neurodegeneration, but remember, because of the gut-brain connection, that brain injury will also hinder the gut function overall. Any of this would be leading into impaired brain functions. Obviously, that would be a challenge there, and that this could actually be tied into some level of developmental delay or early signs of neurodegeneration. We would also look at the potential of chronic diabetes and then also chronic pancreatitis, because basically the destruction of the migrating motor complex could be tied into the oxidative stress of people challenged with these two conditions. Scleroderma is another underlying factor tied into this. Candida overgrowth, so the yeast challenges. Celiac disease, and we're going to talk a little bit deeper about this with some different percentages as how this ties into SIBO. Severe autoimmune or severe immunodeficiency is also tied into this, and it's basically because of the immunodeficiency is basically regulating the enteric bacterial populations of the small intestine, so we want to recognize this. Now, anatomically, other underlying factors could be a fistula or diverticula, which would be basically an area within the intestines where there would be anatomical location where the bacteria could be pooling. So it's basically a change anatomically to the gastrointestinal lining in the wall itself. Those with hypothyroid, another underlying factor for SIBO that most people don't think about. And it's basically the lack of the thyroid hormone activation of the vagal motor nuclei and other migrating motor complex. So it's basically how the thyroid hormone is tied into this motility level. That's one area that most people are overlooking. There could also be surgical alterations. I've seen it before where clients have had surgery with something tied into their gastrointestinal system, which has altered the physical structure of the gastrointestinal system, again, creating a pooling or maybe some type of a lack of the proper migrating motor reflex. And lastly, parasitic infections. Yeah, and this is a tricky one too, because there's a lot of people that will be living with long-term parasitic or protozoa or amoeba or different types of infections in their gut. And I see this all the time, because with my clients, a considerable amount of my clients, I will do stool testing to recognize the pathogens that they would actually be dealing with in their gut. And sometimes what's happening is the long-term parasitic infections have actually affected that whole gut-brain immune connection. And then what's happening, that slowed the motility, which has then led to SIBO. So and I'm not going to say this is a high percentage, but there's still a percentage of people who, because they've been dealing with these parasites or these pathogens for long term, leading to a SIBO condition, which is really something different to look at. You're not going to do a typical stool collection with somebody, and it's not going to tell you they have SIBO. Right, so looking at SIBO as a condition is a completely different test and a completely different area of focus, and honestly, a significantly different treatment protocol for most people. So that's one of the areas that you want to address when people are on parasitic protocols. You might be helping their body overcome this naturally by supporting their immune system to overcome the parasite. But if they're still living into a condition where they're bloated with consistency, and especially with the nutrients I'm going to share shortly, you want to look at SIBO as a potential causative factor for them. So here's some really interesting stats, and I just really wanted to make sure I brought this up because some of these can be astounding. Now, first off, we're looking at there's 9.3% of individuals that have celiac disease also have SIBO. All right, so that's more generalized. But look at the next line underneath that. So we jump from 9.3% to actually 66% of those with celiac that are having a challenge with SIBO for those who are have symptomatic celiac disease. Now, why this is so important to recognize, excuse me, is because 86% of the people, approximately, that have a gluten sensitivity or a overall food sensitivity are asymptomatic. So just because somebody has celiac, which is a full-blown autoimmune response to the reaction to gluten itself, they're not typically symptomatic. But for those who are symptomatic, it's about 66% chance that they would actually also be living with SIBO. It's about 15% of the elderly population is actually living with SIBO, and most of them unknowingly. Which then again, remember, it's leading into the malabsorption and basically the inability to absorb the nutrients properly, both macro and micro, and it's so important. Most as they age, and the elderly aren't really eating over consuming food, so they really need to be getting as much out of their nutrients as they can possibly. 53% of the people who have any type of regular use of antacids have SIBO. So you might even want to put this on your intake form as a practitioner. Just asking people if they use antacids with any regular basis might be a little clue for you to really look at SIBO earlier in the care with that person. Also, 78% of those that have been diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, that's a significant number. So you can see how we can almost throw out the word syndrome here now. We could almost call it irritable bowel SIBO, right? Because 78% of them are going to have SIBO, and I'd be willing to guess that the other 22% have other types of either food sensitivity or other pathogens, parasites and such that they're dealing with. And now, 33% of the people with chronic diarrhea have been recognized to be dealing with SIBO. 34% of people with chronic pancreatitis, so inflammation in the pancreas. And look at the astounding number here. So heavy consumption of alcohol or alcoholics. 90% of alcoholics have SIBO. I mean, that is a huge number. So, and hopefully any time that you may be working with somebody who is an alcoholic or know somebody who's an alcoholic, you would really want them to understand the importance of looking at SIBO as one of the potential challenges tied into alcoholism. I love the stats, so I just couldn't go without sharing these today. Now what we want to do is we want to get a little bit deeper into, I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the different nutrients and what you want to look at and consider as tied into creating the discomfort. So SIBO should be considered if you bloat or experience GI discomfort after consuming starches, sugars or fructose, fructans, prebiotics, some probiotics, fiber supplements, rice or pea protein, or galactans. Any of these can actually be challenges, and for some who may not recognize, a lot of these are recognized aspects of nutrients that most people understand. But for those who don't, basically a starch is considered a large number of glucose units that are actually bonded together. And more simply put, that it's a very common carbohydrate in the diets of human beings, and it's contained in large amounts in some really staples in our diet and our culture, tied into potatoes, wheat, corn, rice, cassava. So that give you an idea of starches. Now, the other areas that people are less familiar with is the galactans and the fructan. Now, the galactans are basically a chain of sugar. They're chains of sugar of galactose. And the primary dietary sources of these could be legumes such as baked beans, kidney beans, chickpeas, soy products, and so on. But these galactans are also present in green and yellow wax beans, cabbage, and Brussels sprouts. So the consumption of some of these foods, if you feel bloating or discomfort afterward, would be a little bit of the red flag that SIBO may be an issue for you. And lastly, the fructans, which is basically a polymer of fructose molecules, and these are basically short chain lengths, and these fructans can occur in foods such as agave, artichokes, asparagus, leeks, garlic, onions, jicama, and wheat. And something that I think is important to understand here as I go through this is you can see a lot of foods on here that I'm mentioning. Like people in general are going to think that potatoes are something that's good for you, that rice is something that would be positive to eat, that would be great to eat legumes and beans and chickpeas and wax beans and cabbage and Brussels sprouts. And and think of agave. Agave has been portrayed as this great healthy sugar, really a natural sugar, but again, it's still an issue for so many people. And there's other challenges with agave that we don't have time to get into today. But even think of the other foods like artichokes and asparagus and garlic and onions, and the jicama. All of these you would think would be really healthy foods. And normally for most people they would, but not if you have SIBO, or in certain amounts if you have SIBO. That's the other tricky part of this. But then if we continue looking at this list, think of some of the other ingredients on this list. Like you think of probiotics. Most people would think it would be a great idea to take a probiotic on a regular basis or a prebiotic. Personally myself, I take approximately 40 billion count of probiotic with a prebiotic every morning. But if I had SIBO, that would be actually irritating the condition of SIBO on a consistent basis. Or you think of fiber supplements. People who feel like they just can't get enough fiber in their diet and they're taking fiber supplements, again, thinking that this is going to be the cure-all for maybe their constipation or their poor motility, only recognizing that there's no improvement. You'd want to think about that. Perhaps that this is not only not improving your constipation, but making it worse because it's irritating SIBO. Or the other one out here that I haven't mentioned, like rice or pea proteins. There's so many people nowadays who will recognize that there's a sensitivity to taking away protein, or they don't like the idea of the soy protein anymore, and they're moving toward more of plant-based proteins and rice or pea. And I'll even say myself, I mean, the main protein powder that I actually recommend to my client base is a pea protein. But a rice or pea protein for somebody who has SIBO is a potential significant issue for them. Yeah, so so think about this for yourself and think about this for your clients. If you are actually recognizing the use of the consumption of these foods or the use of some of these as a supplement, and you recognize, again, bloating or some GI discomfort, you would want to throw up a red flag and suspect SIBO as an underlying issue. So I want to give everybody a simple at-home test that you can do. And this, again, it's not absolute. You're not defining 100% if you have SIBO. But if you actually took 1 heaping teaspoon of plantain flour and you mix this with 8 ounces of water and drink that on an empty stomach, for most people, all you'll have to do is pay attention to your bloating or gut symptoms. Because for the larger percentage of people with SIBO, when you drink that on an empty stomach, you will irritate the SIBO and you will have some type of a symptom. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to give everybody an easy way to do that test later in the presentation. But that's a great, simple, at-home test and I use it basically for clients to, first I'm going to do an assessment that will give me a likelihood or an unlikelihood of having SIBO. Then I'll recommend the plantain, and then from there, if that written assessment and then the plantain shows up as a challenge, then we're definitely going to be testing for SIBO with what I would consider appropriate testing. And again, we're going to address that a little bit deeper later in the presentation. Now, here's the whole thing. Remember I mentioned earlier that SIBO can lead to diarrhea or constipation. So we want to look at really this flow here. Now, remember, it starts with the nutrients. We've got the sugars, the starch, the galactans, the fructans, as mentioned, the fiber supplements, the pre-probiotics, and such that would be creating a challenge here. Now, what happens is these end up being fermented by the small intestinal bacteria because of the overgrowth. This, in turn, will lead to a formation of gas. Now, that gas could be an increase in methane or an increase in hydrogen. Now, if the gas happens to be an increase in methane, this will decrease motility, lead to constipation. Now you're going to have 1 bowel movement per day or less. And sometimes it's, I have clients who will come in that they have a bowel movement like once a week, which is a severe decrease in motility. Now, if the hydrogen gas is increased, then that will increase motility, leading to diarrhea. So those with, and really, you can even see this bouncing back and forth for some individuals depending on the increase of either methane or hydrogen. And so this is one of the a little bit more deeper symptoms that you'll recognize when SIBO is a little bit deeper challenge and irritation for you. So now the testing options. First off, I discussed just a little bit earlier the at-home test. So there's, and as mentioned, if the written assessment and the plantain shows, either one of those show a likelihood, I would recommend further testing. Now, what I use for my clinical preference of working with clients is the breath test, which is a non-invasive breath collection. It's basically going to detect bacterial overgrowth in the distal small intestine, which is another key. There's a 3-hour collection method that reveals SIBO in clients, basically with slow transit times. And with that test, there's also a very convenient interpretation guide right on the test results. That's one of the things that I see very often is that you'll get a test result back and it's almost like reading a whole nother language. But I will share that I will, with my client base, I'm going to want to review that with them, because obviously we're going to make some recommendations on a meal plan and a supplemental protocol to help overcome the SIBO. Now, there are other testing options that you can look at. There's a barium X-ray of the small intestines. So this test basically uses a solution, the barium, to coat the lining of your intestines so it stands out clearly on x-rays. The barium x-ray may reveal maybe a blind loop or diverticulosis or a narrowing or stricture of the intestines, or really other structural problems, as well as potentially slow transit times that can cause a bacterial overgrowth. I just don't feel like this is as direct of a result that we're looking to get. There's also the CT enterography. This test is more sensitive than the barium X-ray or conventional CT, and it basically helps detect inflammation and other structural problems in the bowel and the abnormalities in other organs such as the pancreas. But again, to me, it's not as direct about SIBO. Obviously, also the D-xylose breath test. Some say that this is maybe a little bit more accurate than the hydrogen breath test. I haven't seen that to be the case clinically, but it does measure the amount of carbon dioxide that's actually in the that interferes with the process and suggests the bacterial overgrowth. There are bile acid tests that will, basically the bile acids from your liver, which help digest fats, the lipids in your small intestine. And remember, we talked about that earlier with the floating stool. And the bacterial overgrowth basically interferes with this process. So this test would use a bile salt with a radioactive tracer to check for bile salt dysfunction. But again, to me, that's not as direct of just looking for SIBO. There's also the fecal fat test. And this test can determine basically how well your small intestines absorbs fat. And with that test, what people will do is they'll be directed to eat a high-fat diet for 3 days, and the amount of fat in your stool would then be measured. So large amounts of undigested fat may be caused by bacterial overgrowth. But again, this to me isn't as much really telling us definitively that SIBO is an issue, or there could be a small intestine, aspirate and a fluid culture. But while this might be the most sensitive test for bacterial overgrowth, but to obtain this, you would actually have a fluid sample where a doctor would pass a long flexible tube, the endoscope, down your throat and through your upper GI tract to your small intestines. And then a sample of this fluid is basically withdrawn, and then it's tested in a lab for the growth of bacteria. Now, this might be the best option, but it's also very expensive and it's also invasive. So really not the best option for most people to use personally. But I did want to, even though they're not tests that I use, I wanted to give everybody the options in case they're, another practitioner you're working with and they're suggesting other areas. And also for all the practitioners, just to really understand how they might help their clients in different ways. I know. Excuse me. Next in here is really the importance of the SIBO diet. Now, basically with my clients, I use the FODMAP diet. Now, the FODMAP diet to me is the best dietary recommendations, nutritional recommendations you can make for SIBO. There's many different diets out there on SIBO. If you go on in the internet, you're going to have, if you look at 10 different diets for SIBO, they're going to have different foods that they feel you can or cannot eat. I like the FODMAP diet because it breaks it down into legal foods, like low FODMAP foods, to moderate to high, and to completely illegal foods. And to me, it makes it easier because you can help people by focusing on the low FODMAP. Then as time goes on, they could start adding in the moderate and maybe the high. And once they reach the point where they completely overcome SIBO, then they can get the so-called illegal foods back in. And I want to share that based on my clinical practice, diet is essential. You don't think that you're going to take the SIBO protocol or even use antibiotics and then this is going to take care of it. All that's going to do is going to, for a short period of time, lower the irritation of the SIBO and maybe the count of the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But in the long run, because of the lack of the proper diet, you're likely just going to be living with this again and again. And to me, that doesn't make sense. Now, regardless of the use of natural or antibiotic treatments, I still feel the SIBO diet is essential. I also, recognizing that the FODMAP diet is really based on less fermentable to more fermentable food choices. So the foods that are low on the FODMAP would be the less fermentable, and the foods that would be considered illegal would be the most fermentable food choices. And obviously the key is for the fermentation to be as low as possible. So I can't say enough on how important that is. Now, the protocol that I use with my clients at Depke Wellness and in our Depke Wellness Center is a combination of this entire protocol. The Symbiotica is a SIBO-friendly probiotic. Now, what's interesting with this is, again, when you start searching the internet, you're going to have a lot of different opinions on which probiotic can actually be used with SIBO. Some are going to say the Symbiotica it doesn't address that properly. I've found a really astounding clinical result with the Symbiotica. The Repairvite SC, which is basically a gut restorative powder that you mix with water, but it has removed a lot of the basic supplements that are typically used for gut restoration that would irritate SIBO, things like DGL, diglyceride licorice root, or aloe vera, or marshmallow root. Some of those would, while they would be good for overall most people with gut restorative, it's not good for people with SIBO. An Enzymix Pro, which is a combination of an enzyme and a and also a betaine HCl that are both utilized with SIBO. And in Terabyte, which adds the butyric acid, which is a fatty acid, that is, the butyric acid is also another important part in the integration of healing the gut lining, but also provides a boost of energy from the breakdown of the fat into energy through beta oxidation, which is important for people on a, as I said, a low FODMAP diet, because often there's a little bit of a restriction of what they're eating at that time. I would also recommend a Clearvite GL, which is a basically an overall nutrient replacement with a liver support that is also SIBO friendly, so we're not worried about a pea protein or rice or any other protein that would irritate SIBO. And for people who I feel that the SIBO, and I'm going to recognize this by testing, where it is a significant challenge, where the SIBO numbers are really like off the charts, I would use something referred to as a GI synergy as almost like that natural antibiotic to actually help them overcome the SIBO with a little bit more speed and efficiency. But that isn't a clear cut for every SIBO case. Now, there's other supplements that other practitioners may use, that you may use yourself, that you might find out on the internet. ADP, or which is just a particular brand of oregano oil, FC Sadel, Dysbiocide, berberine HCl. Because of the deficiencies, some will recommend iron supplements, B12 or K2, vitamin D, and zinc. These are all potential supplements that would be recommended for somebody with SIBO. But as I had mentioned earlier, I always, while I'm not against supporting with iron or B12 or zinc or some of these other nutrients, and the zinc is also another essential part of reestablishing a healthy mucosal lining within your gut. You still want to get to the core. You want to get to what's causing this. You want to take care of the SIBO itself. But these are all positive supplement support for anybody that has a SIBO condition. And the other question we have, I mentioned this earlier, is the natural treatment or antibiotics the best option for us? And basically, I do recommend using natural treatments for at least 3 to 6 months. In my practical application of natural treatments, the natural protocols are typically very to extremely successful. I've seen people go from extreme high levels of SIBO recognition and testing to completely done with their protocol in a 3-month time period. But again, those are people who are being very strict with the SIBO diet as well as their supplement protocol. Now, if natural treatment, because there's nothing is 100%. If natural treatment is not successful, if you've been following a natural treatment protocol for 6 months, antibiotics might be an option for you tied into conventional medicine at that point. But again, you still want to remember the importance of the diet, and I would still always support naturally when you're dealing with the antibiotics, because as is mentioned here next, there may be secondary challenges with the antibiotics, such as candida, yeast overgrowth, dysbiosis, different bacterial imbalances, and just overall GI distress and lack of proper digestion can all be caused by that too. And lastly, remember that diet is really a key. The SIBO diet is such an important factor. And at this point, you might be almost sick of me saying that, but I can't say it enough. It's something that's very important for all of us. And now a little gift here to get your plantain flour, and also, and I didn't put this in there specifically, but there's also a very short assessment that I am going to give to everybody that's listening to this, whether you're listening to it live or the recording. Because instead of searching the internet for plantain flour and paying quite a bit for this usually large container of plantain flour, we would like to provide this as basically a bonus gift for you. So if you contact us at info@depkewellness.com and just provide your name and your address, and put in a phone number in case we have the address wrong or there's some complications, send that and just put in the subject line SIBO gift or SIBO bonus gift, and we'll make sure that not only will we ship out the plantain flour to you as our gift, but we're also going to email you over that short little presentation or the questionnaire, the assessment, to see if SIBO is a likely challenge for you. So that's I believe the least I could do for everybody. And basically, if you have any questions with anything today, I like to be somebody. I believe that I'm definitely somebody who's approachable. You could go to our website. I've got some articles on SIBO that you would probably find of interest. I also do have the SIBO breath test in the store on my website. But if you have any questions, you can also email us at support@DepkeWellness, or the number on here, the 949-954-6226. That is my direct office line. Yeah, so you can call me with any questions or comments based on this presentation. If I'm with a client or out of the office, I won't be picking up, but you will either get my voicemail, or more than likely you will get one of our friendly front desk staff to pick that up and take your message. So we just love to make sure that you have the information that you need, especially if you're feeling that SIBO is an issue for you, or if you're working with clients that SIBO is likely a challenge. So. And lastly, I can't ever finish this up except for the same way I started it, with a special thanks to Paula and the entire staff at Hawthorn University, because of all the great things that they do. Very much appreciated all the time, and for really even putting on these presentations. This is an incredible service for basically all of us. And there is a list of references, so if you're going through this and you want to look up some of the areas that I referenced based on research, you can go ahead and pull this up. And we're to probably my favorite part of the presentation. So Paula, here we are.
Glad to get to your favorite part, Glenn. Absolutely. And generous as always. I hope to take the bulk of the questions here, and so you don't have anybody calling your office for them. But it's very kind. A few things here. Coming back to the ileocecal valve, I was so glad that you brought that in, because I think it's a piece that's often neglected when we talk about SIBO or a number of GI conditions. But with that valve, it's really designed to be a one-way valve, so that things move, from your mouth through your exit valve in the anus, and it stays that way. It stays descending. But as you indicated, it becomes a two-way valve when it's dysregulated, and therefore, there's different pH, as we go through the entire GI tract from the mouth on down, and that changes. And so it's more of an acidic environment
Hmm.
potentially in the large bowel, and less so in the small bowel. So you have a pH change and different bacteria in different locations. And when those start to back up and get mixed up into the small bowel, we get a lot of irritation, and it's hard to eradicate it or deal with it when you've got a dysfunctional ileocecal valve. That I find in my practice is often due to inflammation.
Hmm.
Inflammation is just holding it open. It can't close itself. It's too swollen.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right on. And I'm happy you brought that other factor up too, is that it's like a lot of people think with SIBO that there's like this secret like SIBO bacteria. And it could be any number of different types of bacteria that can migrate into the small intestines. And you're right on with the inflammation. When I just think of just overall conditions, I mean, the inflammation can cause almost anything. And I see that as being a big part also of the ileocecal valve dysfunction. And one other area I didn't bring up when I was talking about it is sometimes there's a structural aspect. I mean, sometimes I'm asking one of my clients to go see a chiropractor because there could be an adjustment to actually help with that, and it could be something going on in the vertebrae. So there's so many different possibilities there. But yeah, it's such a big part of this.
Mhm. And you talked about alcohol use and being such a contributing factor, and the range from moderate to heavy alcohol. Would you qualify that for us of what you consider moderate alcohol to heavy alcohol?
Yeah, the way I define, a moderate alcohol to where it would actually be challenging for the potential of SIBO is through my research through the years is that when we drink, it generally takes the body about 3 days to recover from alcohol consumption. And so if somebody is drinking within every 3 days consistently, I would consider that what would be that moderate use. It's that's why even with myself, I mean, I'm not going to, there's some people who think that I just do everything perfect and never touch alcohol, and that would be a lie. I will occasionally have a glass of wine, but at this point in my life, I'm committed to, where I'm only going to typically drink, maybe at the most once a week, but you have to have that time to give the body the time to really heal and balance from that. So if you're drinking within every third day or more, I would consider that the moderate.
So there's a big difference here of a glass of wine or a beer every third day and a six-pack every
Right.
other day,
Yes.
and a quart of Jack Daniels every night. We're
Right.
really getting into amounts, not just frequency.
Right. No, exactly. And then that's the thing too, is, having, well, we all know that number one, there's usually a difference between, like somebody having a glass of wine and a beer, because the high percentage of people with a gluten issue, and the beers typically contain gluten, and gluten and alcohol together will increase the challenges with gluten about tenfold. So that can be an issue just in itself.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, if we're looking at somebody who's drinking a glass of wine, uh, as compared to somebody who sits down to drink a bottle of wine, and it really could be just an unrecognized or a not accepted level of alcoholism that somebody's dealing with. And and unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are like that, where that six pack every other day or sometimes every day is a normal occurrence, to really, unfortunately, like dealing with some level of pain in their lives that they're trying to self-medicate.
Yeah.
But again, from a SIBO perspective, specifically, that's a significant. Again, that's the 90 percentile. That's
Sure.
the people. 90% of those people, whether you want to consider yourself an alcoholic or just a heavy drinker, you have a 90% likelihood of being challenged with SIBO.
Mhm. And I want to come back to the breath test for SIBO for a minute because well, I think it's a non-invasive test, and fairly simple. It does come with a prior day's dietary restriction.
Yes.
Um, and so can you talk about that just a little bit, what the restrictions are?
Yeah, well, the one thing that I can't be absolute on that, just because there was one test that I was using from Genova that
Hmm.
had recently changed their restrictions,
Hmm.
And but it is severely limiting the foods that you can eat that day before. And actually now I'm using a test from BioHealth that I think is a little bit easier test for people to basically find their way through. And I haven't. I'm actually going to take it personally because even though I don't think SIBO is an issue, I like to personally take each test, and I
Yes.
haven't taken that one personally, so I can't answer that absolute right now.
Yes, I'm in the same situation where, looking at new tests, looking at biohealths and exploring that. But, for me, and it's come up for a number of clients who eat a fairly healthy diet,
Mm-hmm.
that you're knocking out all vegetables, all fruit, all nuts, seeds, all dairy. What am I missing here? Alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
any kind of sugars. So what do we have left? we have
Right.
we have animal protein,
Right. Well,
So,
and what's interesting is if I remember the most updated nutritional recommendations for the Genova test with that, I even think it was suggesting like a rice, and don't 100% quote me on this, but when I was looking at the more updated, and I could look it up on my computer, but I don't want to take my focus away from the
that's
webinar
okay.
today. But yeah, it was just so it does it's severely restricted for the day before, and the testing itself. I mean, it's to get the proper results on your SIBO test. What I want everybody to understand, if you're doing the breath test, you have to, I would recommend to read and reread the directions several times to make sure you have all the directions down. Because if you miss something, if you miss a direction somewhere, it can actually completely just, make the test illegitimate for you. And you want to make
Exactly.
sure that you have a good focus on what you're doing on that test.
Yeah, exactly. So, um, so have some good meat consumption the day
Right.
before. Read the instructions is very good. You're going to basically mix up this sugar solution and drink it over the period all at once, and then test every 10 minutes for the next 3 hours. So you're breathing every 10 minutes. So you need to have a
Mm-hmm.
good schedule. You need a good alarm clock. You need to have no other distractions, so that's what your focus is, and you're collecting, because you don't want to get through 8 of them and
Right,
eight
yeah,
breath
and to get to the
samples
end, it's like, oh
and
no,
blow
right?
it, right?
Yeah, and I've had that happen with people. I've had it,
Sure.
I've had clients that have taken the test and have done everything right except for, like, a little mishap on one of the time frames, and the test was completely invalid.
Yes.
Yes, that's not
Yeah.
fun either.
No. No. And as lastly here for me, I'm really glad that you focused, really well on iron deficiency and anemia. It's a huge issue, and particularly, red flag, as you brought up, is when you're supplementing and you're still iron deficient.
Right.
Um, so I think this is another, just anemia, iron deficiency is another topic I'd like you to come back to and speak on,
I'd love
Glenn,
that.
because it's such an important topic, and I'm seeing more and more of it. So,
Yeah, no, that would be it'd be a great opportunity for me, and it's something I would love to share with everybody
okay,
because it is, as I said, it's not to put it really that way, but it is a deal breaker for a lot of
sure,
people.
sure. So let's talk a little bit about the protocol that you recommend for the supplements. Can you give some general sense of what the length of administration would be for the botanicals in these products, and somewhat of a range of dosage?
Sure. So I'm usually starting dosing small, starting with smaller dosing and working my way up. Most people are taking, I'm just starting with one of the Symbiotica, and then working up to one twice a day, maybe at the max two twice a day. The enterovite, which I mentioned, which is the butyric acid, uh, most people are taking one twice a day, but we can really work up to like maybe four of those twice a day, depending on where their energy levels are. If they're on the SIBO diet and they're just depleted energetically, I'll recommend to go up to like 4 capsules twice per day and really get the benefit of the conversion through the beta oxidation from fat into energy. The Repairvite is SC, which is really a very dressed down version of Repairvite, because this is just basically L-glutamine and zinc because those are both non-irritating to SIBO. But that's a scoop taken typically in the morning and at night before bedtime. And the Enzymix Pro, I would recommend one of those with each meal to help with the enzyme breakdown, but also, recognizing that this doesn't have enzymes in it that would irritate SIBO. And then also the betaine HCl in there, which is hugely important because most people with SIBO are deficient in stomach acid. And then lastly, the Clearvite would typically be one scoop mixed with water or an appropriate smoothie that would be SIBO friendly, and that would be maybe one before breakfast and dinner, or for a lot of people just one per day. And the entire protocol I would typically do for 3 months and then retest.
Mm-hmm.
There's that would vary a bit based on the SIBO results. If somebody is like off the charts, the high differential between the gas at time at the beginning and the end of the test, that particular person, we might increase some of the supplements slightly over time and keep them on a little bit longer than that before a retest. But most people, it's 3 months. And I also pay attention to how they're feeling. There are some people who, once they get on the SIBO diet and they get on the supplements, there's some people who they feel significant improvement within just a number of days. It might be 3 days and the bloating goes away and they feel so much better. But if somebody that has been on the diet and really focusing on the low FODMAP foods and then the protocol for a month, and if it's like night and day for them, I might recommend testing sooner, because as soon as we get the test back that shows this isn't an issue, then I'm going to tell them, hey, just finish up the supplements you have, and at that point we'll start adding in some of the moderate FODMAP foods and paying attention to how they feel.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's some of the, it creates a nice level of awareness for most people too when they really kind of clean up their diet and then add something in, and then you notice some level of challenge. That's usually very helpful for people. And I want to bring up the food. I want to bring up one point that I didn't mention during the webinar. That's another a potential challenge with people on a SIBO diet, is because it is so restrictive. I always say that out of the legal foods for you to consume, I always say to be as, to create as much variety as you possibly can, because there's some people who they'll get to the point where they only eat they rotate 5 foods, for 3 months. And,
right.
and if we have that severe of a restriction to the availability of different foods, then that creates another issue with the microbiome, which is just another digestive challenge we're throwing into the mix. So I always want people to be as be really as experimental as you can with trying different foods and new foods that you haven't had in a long time. And it's amazing with clients that through the years of doing this, is you have so many people who they'll experience new foods that they absolutely love, and now they're a regular part of their regular daily routine because they've experienced something new on their SIBO diet.
Yeah, you're right. It happens all the time. You need to pay attention here. A lot of paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
If you have clients that show that they're methane dominant from the test, do you have a different protocol for that?
No, I haven't. I haven't seen the need to do anything different from one to the next. If that would ever happen, I would obviously look deeper into it, but I've not found that need to date so far.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Now, FODMAPs, starting a diet, starting botanical, starting protocol here. There's some variations of what people are recommending, and Dr. Pimentel, his advice is not to start a FODMAP diet until after doing botanicals and or antibiotics, and doing that so that the bacteria doesn't become dormant or resist the treatment. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I've heard that. I haven't seen it, show up in my practice in that way.
Mm-hmm.
I've even had some people who, if as an example, let's say they do the short assessment on SIBO, and then they do the plantain test, and there's just sometimes where people just, they might not have the accessible income or extra money to do a test or something, and I might even just recommend to do the diet, and if, and I would think that maybe for some people that are on a low level of challenge for SIBO and they get on the diet, that helps to regulate and balance, and then their motility changes in a positive way. And I might even just recommend maybe taking an HCl supplement, and I'm amazed at sometimes how that can help. But most of the people, I would obviously prefer that they're doing the testing to confirm this. But yeah, as far as the question, I haven't seen that to be an issue with going into the diet right away.
Okay. Now, in terms of FODMAP's diet, there's some variations, but not so much. We're pretty much have a sense of what they are. Do you have a source that you would recommend online for people to get a full list of the FODMAP foods to avoid and to include?
Well, there's the doctor, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering the name. I was going to say it earlier and then I forgot the pronunciation. But Dr. I believe it's Seebecker, who put together this
Steinbecker, yeah.
FODMAP diet, and and just looking for that online, and it's readily accessible.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be something that if somebody can't find it, you can also again, you can send an email to that info@Depke Wellness, and we would share that, and welcome you to look at Dr. Seebecker's information on this, because I think it's just invaluable what's been put together for all of us to use, and really just the more information you get on this, the better anyway.
Sure. And Dr. Chris Kresser has some good work. If you Google Chris Kresser FODMAP's diet, he has some very good posts, and goes and just really details what it is, what the intolerance is, foods to include, foods to avoid. So you can get that there. And then from the ibsdiets.org, they have a good list on, Google that also for FODMAPs. And that's got some interesting variations, but a very detailed list, full list of foods to avoid, foods to reduce, foods to include, foods to emphasize, kind of variations there. So there's 3 or 4 really good resources for you to look up more on FODMAP diet, and then more generosity from Glen Depke here in Depke Wellness to contact them to get the plantain flour and the SIBO written assessment and FODMAP diet information from them as well. And Glenn, if it would help you, well, I guess I can't really do the assignments and the assessment or the flour, but the FODMAP diet. If you want to include that as an attachment, we can post it to the webinar recording.
Okay, yeah, I could do that.
Okay, so the assessment, we can both have the written assessment and the FODMAP diet information up there, and then if people want the flour, they can get it from you directly.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, and if you do me a favor, and just so I make sure I have a follow through with that, if you can send me an email, and I'll make sure I get that back to
you. You bet. We'll take care of it like that.
I'm being realistic, right?
Sure. Yep. We have to. What we say in the moment and what we remember afterwards is
could be two different things. Exactly. There's that gut-brain connection, right?
Sometimes it means we're hungry. So I've had you talking here for a while, Glenn. I really, I love the way that you present. You put things in you organize it so well and just detail it through. Thank you again for a really good presentation.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Well, it's honestly, as far as I'm concerned, it's just information that everybody needs to know. And we might as well have fun with it and make it as simple as we can. I'm definitely not the presenter who's going to use all 25-letter words that nobody understands, because you know what, I don't want to listen to presentations like that myself. So it's just a lot of fun, and it's just a great group and community with Hawthorn. So it's just an expression. I feel like I'm just an expression of what Hawthorn really is. So it's always my pleasure.
Always a pleasure for us too. So I'm going to have you hang around for a couple minutes while I do some closing comments here, because I want to remember everybody that this webinar was recorded, and James will have it archived up onto our website in just a few days. So you'll be able to review it, recommend it to other people, and there's a wide variety of other topics that you can explore and choose from as well. And as usual, I hope that we've inspired you to learn more about health and nutrition. And if we have and you want more information, please get in touch with us. Our website's packed with useful information, but also a lot about our programs and the courses that we offer. And so after visiting our website, if you have more questions, you can always contact our Director of Admissions, Kathy McDermott. She's happy to talk with you. And like I said when we started, there will be a survey to fill out after the webinar ends. And, you know, it's my encouragement to you to do this as a favor to us and to all of you, because from this information, we can serve you better. It helps us to have your feedback and your comments. We consider it carefully and really appreciate you taking the time. And if you let us know what you think about this presentation and what you'd like to hear about in other presentations, things like that, we'll take it into consideration and follow through. And pretty soon, your dream presentation will be coming to Hawthorn. I also wanted to remind you about our All About Alumni series. It's on the first Wednesday of the month. We've got that coming up on June 7th with Autumn Smith. And our next webinar, our Tuesday night webinar, is on July 7th with Hawthorn faculty, Dr. Bianca Garilli. She did a presentation on May 17th, the genetic and epigenetic influences on the development and treatment of ADHD. And in that time, we were excited about her coming back to present her case studies. July 7th is the date. So for ADHD case studies, please come back for more from Bianca. She also was a terrific presenter and very well organized, and this will be a great part 2 for that. It's information that we've been waiting for, and I'm excited about it. So I'll be here, and I hope that you will be too. I'll start us off at 3:50 Pacific time with some announcements, holistic health news, so I hope you'll join me for that segment too. I think that's it. This concludes today's presentation. I want to thank you again, Glen Depke and Depke Wellness. Thank you for this presentation and everything you do, Glen, also.
You're welcome. It's always my pleasure.
Yeah. It's my pleasure to share educational experiences like this with all of you. And until our next one, I wish you all the best of health, and I look forward to learning more together at Hawthorn University's webinar series. Take care, everybody.